Formally, I'd like to, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, welcome everybody to our meeting today. And we have our presenter for the day. I just want to make sure I get all of this information correct. He's Frater Jedediah French, who's joining us from Germany. Please give a wave, say hello, Jedediah.
Yes, hello to all.
That's great. I hope everybody can see and hear Jedediah well. And the subject of Jedediah's presentation today, which I'm personally really looking forward to, is reflections on alchemy and spiritual development. So I'm just going to pin your screen as the main screen. I'm going to mute everybody else. So Jedediah, once I've muted everybody, you'll need to unmute yourself again, just so that we don't have audio interruptions from other people maybe. And so I'm going to mute everybody now. And I'll.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? It's about 45 minutes I have to speak, something like that? Okay.
That's perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. So Jedediah, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly. And that's great. I've now got your image pinned as the main image on the screen, which we're recording. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over the presentation to you. So over to you.
Thank you. Before I start, maybe I'll try to share my screen here because I have
absolutely.
a
I beg your pardon.
Okay.
I will arrange that now.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to do so now.
All right, let's see if this works.
Looks like it. Yes.
You see? Okay. And I will also attempt to make it larger here. So we see this too?
Yes, that's perfect, sir.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, greetings and hello to everyone. Thank you for the invitation to speak. This body is very important to me, and I'm just very happy to sort of be involved here in a more international sense. Also, hello to everyone in the bookstore there in London. I wish I could be there in person. I was there recently and I did not get to that particular bookstore, and I really wanted to. So hopefully in the future I'll have a chance to go there. All right, so this is a different kind of presentation. I want to sort of talk about this at the beginning. I have notes that I'm going to read from and slides, but it's there have been so many articles, books, presentations, and so on about alchemy that it sometimes feels like everything has been said, maybe. At least sometimes it seems this way to me, even though it's a very interesting subject. I thought, okay, I want to talk about alchemy, but most people know the basics. So much ink has been spilled about this subject that I wanted to just try to do something a little bit different. So that's why my presentation will have a little bit of a different kind of feel. It's a bit more reflective. It's from the title, you see reflections, a bit more artistic and so on, and a little bit more just exploring. So I'm going to go ahead and begin then. See if I can make this smaller. Yes. So to start, I want to say that this is not going to be an academic or a scholarly presentation. While I may refer to scholars and certain historical events and texts, my objective here is rather that of exploration, creativity, inspiration, artistic inspiration. So in other words, this is a subjective presentation. In no way am I here trying to transmit any kind of truth. On the contrary, I want to experiment with the deeply imaginative, the deeply personal and experiential. For it is in this realm of knowledge, which is often typically relegated to the field of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, that the transformation of an extremely fine substance can be transformed, or it can be actualized, which is, after all, the goal of alchemy. So this ungraspable, thin, elusive, finite substance that I want us to think about here is the mind, the soul, the spirit, however you want to call it, with all of its various parts and divisions that human beings across time have endeavored to map, to code, to systematize. So I therefore rely heavily on images and pictures for this presentation, as this is the language of the substance of becoming to which I just made mention and to which I want to focus on, in opposition to, let's say, the grammar and punctuation of language. So alchemy is also well known for this, the importance of images. And so I'm going to use many images that sometimes I'll have a lot to say about, sometimes not, just for us to sort of look at, to let them work on our perception on this fine substance that is to be transformed in a kind of experiential, experimental way. Because the language of images is a different kind of language as it morphs, transmutes, develops meanings that are more deeply subjective. So here I am very interested in my own subjective view of alchemy. So this is my vision to you. This is why I called it reflections rather than history of alchemy or blah, blah, blah in alchemy, something like this. I said reflections. And these are simple reflections. So as an example here, when the philosopher Nietzsche wrote his ideas about philosophy, he walked. As he walked, he scribbled his thoughts on sheets of paper, which by the end of his life were scattered all around his home like a blizzard, just notes everywhere, which later had to be turned into something more cohesive. But this presentation of mine is more like this. You see, a montage of thoughts and reflections on alchemy. At the same time, this doesn't mean that there's no deep content that I'm offering here. Just think about Nietzsche again. So I'm going to go through a few examples and reflect on how they relate alchemically to spiritual development in the way that I want to subjectively interpret these images and ideas. But one academic-y thing that I should do here is, how do I define spiritual development? What am I talking about here? Because it's kind of a vague term. This is my own definition here that I'll share with you. I'm thinking about the development of consciousness of the spiritual, developing consciousness towards an awareness, a conscious awareness of the spiritual element in reality. So the transformation of the self from earthly to cosmic, which comes with this awareness. And this transformation for me, the spiritual development, also presupposes a kind of humble simplicity and moral goodness. And finally, the experience of oneness with nature and with all beings. If I were to take all those together into one phrase, it would be the attainment of wisdom. So for me, I'm equating spiritual development in alchemy with the attainment of wisdom. But there are, of course, at least two schools of thoughts about alchemy. There's this kind of spiritual, psychological alchemy, and then laboratory or operative alchemy. And I want to turn from this binary to think about to rename them as external and internal. Well, of course, fully acknowledging that historically speaking, the tradition of alchemy, so far as we know it, brought together these two domains and hardly entertained such a division. But I'm going to make this division here for my purposes. On the one side, you see something like external alchemy, which has to do with laboratory work, distillation, something like a precursor to modern chemistry. The goal is apparently transmutation of matter from a base element, base metal such as lead into gold. Also the idea of creating the philosopher's stone and the creation of plant tinctures and healing tinctures and so forth. Then you have the internal alchemy, which is inner spiritual work that has to do with the practices like contemplation and meditation, uses symbols and allegory. And here we're talking about the transformation of the self. It's more about a purification process of the self, turning the gross soul or the unrefined soul into the golden soul or the golden sun. I wrote SOL here in Latin. So that's I do want us to make this division, and of course I'm focusing on the spiritual one. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about laboratories or protochemistry or anything like this. I want to talk about these two different paths within this spiritual side. So on the one side, I want us to think about the solar path of spiritual alchemy, of internal alchemy. And this I'm going to designate with as the cosmocrator path. The cosmocrator is, of course, the name given to in Christian theology to the Lord of the universe. It's it's a famous image you find in many churches and so forth. In some old Gnostic texts, this phrase is actually used to designate Satan, like a kind of demiurge. So you also find this, but this stream is external in focus. This is about the waking world. This represents this cosmocrator, this sun being. This is about male to male birth. So you can think of the homunculus. You could think of also the story of Athena sprouting from the head of Zeus and so on. That it's this trope that we find in this particular stream, this more outward directed stream, transmutation of matter led into gold in the philosopher's stone and so on. So of course, now that I say it like this, it does relate to the other stream as well, with this outward focus, this sort of materialistic focus. But I'm bringing it in here because I want to, even within spiritual alchemy, I want to contrast it with this other stream, which is the stream I want to focus on. And this is the stream of the cosmic virgin. So in opposition to the cosmocrator, we have the Theotokos, meaning God bearer. And so this particular stream is internally focused in the dreaming world, the world of images. This is the moon sphere, or the moon being. And here we have the trope of the female to male birth, the giving birth from the cosmic virgin to the Christ child. So here is more meant, and what I want to focus on here and sort of put as part of this path, the transmutation of spirit in particular, of one's spirit, of the alchemist's spirit, from the lower self to a higher self. Sometimes if you can find this kind of idea within the Holy Grail traditions about transforming one's spirit or soul or something into this kind of vessel to receive the wisdom. So it's a little bit something like this. So therefore we have these two paths that I'm describing here. One is a solar path, one is a lunar path. Both paths lead to rebirth. One is rebirth in the external, which transforms material conditions. We see the gesture of command over the civilizations in the background in this image here with the sun. And we also see elements of the physical world like the wind and so forth. And you also see that in the image here, he has a child in his stomach that he's going to give birth to. And then on the other side, we have this lunar path. And here the rebirth is internal, which transforms spiritual conditions. And the figure here is retreating from civilization, walking away from it into nature, into the realm of primal forces and instincts, which is symbolized by the animals. One could even think about Gilgamesh and Enkidu from the Epic of Gilgamesh, that one sort of represented this world of nature and the animal forces, and the other one was this kingly Gilgamesh world of civilization and matter and sun energies and so on. So in this lunar path that I'm just describing here is a sort of a creative exercise. The cosmic virgin is the representative of this path. So in this path, the so-called lunar path, the alchemist pursues the cosmic virgin all through the secret and hidden places of nature, which is to say, into the alchemist's own inner nature. The alchemist is in fact in pursuit of interior wisdom, of the sound Aya, that is Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. But in order to achieve this wisdom, this nature that the alchemist seeks internally must be worked on. These are the so-called animal instincts, and these things must be, or in passions and so forth. This animal nature must be worked on, must be cleansed, must be transformed, must be fashioned into something new. So in the lunar path of the cosmic virgin, it is the interiority of the alchemist that is the laboratory. And the substance of the soul and the various subtle bodies, these are the things that must be merged, mixed, liberated, raised up, cleansed, and so on. This process is sometimes referred to as the St. Mary's bath in the literature of alchemy. But these inner substances, let's call them that, they are not so easily transformed. They struggle, they fight back, they resist. And so in this process, a battle ensues, a battle for the ultimate transformation of this substance, the interior substance of the alchemist, the spirit. And there's a great image here that I wanted to show from an old alchemical work here, where you can see there's this dirty, it's a Splendor Solis, I think this one. There's the dirty, sort of muddy figure emerging from the water. And there is a female angel with a crown and a star on her head. And she's holding like basically like a towel or something to clean off this dirty individual. And around the frame of the picture, you see all these animals, and you see the forces of nature. You see the forces of nature, the fruits of nature, plants, and so on. But this battle that I just mentioned, it eventually comes to a moment of death, of an encounter with the death forces. This moment of death is, however, the prerequisite for the rebirth. The rebirth, in other words, the transmutation of the spirit. This moment of death is required in order to achieve the next step. Within this next step, within this battle of death that results in death, to get to the next step, the polarities of the instincts, the warring drives, the warring passions, the idea of double-mindedness, of not being able to make a decision, of seeing everything in terms of advantages and disadvantages, and these kind of polarities. This must be resolved in the fire, in the death processes. This is a prerequisite, excuse me, as I mentioned, in order for the Christ self, which is what I want to call the embodiment of wisdom in this lunar path, since we're using the Virgin Mary and so on. This Christ self is the new self, this embodiment of wisdom. So these polarities must be resolved in the death process in order for this Christ self to be born. And that ends my picture of a so-called lunar path. So, is there actually any basis for these ideas that I have just presented to you? There is a little bit. Some scholars have pointed out that, in fact, the image of the Virgin Mary was indeed integrated into the dynamic symbolism of alchemy during the late Middle Ages and the early modern period. We begin to see this imaginal concept in manuscripts of the late Middle Ages. And here we see the alchemists, they draw on the idea of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary that has a long history in Catholic art, as well as the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, another trope. And finally, the apocalyptic woman in the Revelation of St. John. All of these motifs are utilized by the alchemists. And so here I am drawing on the work of the art historian Ursula Sulakowska, and as well as an independent scholar named Roberta Albrecht. These are books. They're both of their books you see here. They're quite interesting books. So some of the ideas that I'm presenting now come from these books. So according to Ursula Sulakowska, the quote-unquote cosmic virgin refers to, I'm going to write a quote from this book, quote, "The depiction of Mary is elevated into the heavens amidst sun, moon, stars, and planetary spheres. This iconography describes her as belonging simultaneously to the human and divine realms, as both the image of material nature and God's handmaiden. Mary is co-redemptress with Christ in the work of rescuing humanity and the cosmos from eternal damnation," end quote. Alchemists like Robert Flood, Michael Meyer, Nicholas Flamel, and others drew on these images to represent wisdom or Sophia as both Mother Nature and Mother Nurturer, as well as the divine light bringer of Christ. For the alchemist, Mary is the doorway to ascension and the vessel into which Christ consciousness, or the wisdom-filled cosmic self, can be poured. Here's another quote from Sulakowska. Quote, "The primary alchemical process is the unification of the male and female principles believed to be immanent in prime matter. In the figurative imagery of the female, she is variously identified with the moon, earth, silver, and mercury. After she has been ritually purified, the female figure represents the reborn virginal alchemical tincture, daughter of sun and moon and the product of distillation. The tincture is one of the final stages in the creation of the philosopher's stone," end quote. So in other words, the way I would like to interpret this, in the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, Mary is in fact created free of original sin, and thus returns the apple of Eve to the garden and removes the bite that was originally taken out of it this fall. This is actually part of the doctrine of Immaculate Conception, but for me, what's crucial here is that the fall is reversed in the idea of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. So some scholars have called the Cosmic Virgin of Robert Flood, whose image you see here on one side of the screen, Mother Natura, quickener with the crown of stars, and the anima mundi, or soul of the world, connecting the divine and the animal nature. This image is the alchemical version of Mary, but also of Eve. So it's famously in Christianity, there were many Marys and Eve, many women. A lot of these are conflated over time, but here we're making a connection between the Immaculate Conception idea of Mary, Robert Flood's idea of this cosmic virgin, who you see is this link between the spiritual and the material. And also in this image from the Middle Ages here, you see both Mary and Eve in the garden, this notion that the fall is somehow reversed through this process. Now, of course, these are, especially in Catholic art, this is thought of in a very universal sort of totalizing sense, but here I'm thinking about this in the subjective sense that I brought in at the beginning. So all of these images, all these ideas are that transpiring within the alchemist. But there's another figure that's added to this, the so-called apocalyptic woman. Here's a final quote from Zilikowska. Quote, in Catholic art, the apocalyptic woman is always shown with her child and her attributes as those described in Revelation 12. That is, a woman clothed in the sun, standing on the moon, and crowned with 12 stars. She gives birth to a child and is pursued by a dragon who desires to devour them. The woman flees into the desert, and God snatches the child into heaven, end quote. So the alchemical cosmic virgin is therefore crowned with stars and often stands on the surface of the sea. She is the personification of wisdom, in fact, the alchemical quintessence. The 5 stars directly above her head, in this picture, 5, can be various number. These signify the direct access to this cosmic wisdom, sort of opening portal to the stars. The water beneath her illustrates that this is a spiritual process, yet at the same time, it requires the resolution of polarities, even of the material and the spiritual, which is often represented by the presence of the sun and moon. So a little background there on the kind of, even some of the historical reality of how Mary was used as this cosmic virgin, so-called, this alchemical image of Mary was developed and used in different ways. So I'm not going to go, though, in a final direction here. So my time is still doing okay. So this is sort of the first half of my presentation. The second half is I wanted to use a concrete example of this alchemical situation that I just described. I want to show this whole theme instantiated in stone, in materiality. So to do that, I want to talk about this very well-known cathedral in France, the cathedral in Chartres. And so for this next part, we're going to go again on this kind of creative, imaginative journey, interpreting some of these symbols and ideas. And I use this cathedral because it's I spent a lot of time there. It's very close to me, and having been there a number of times and sort of studied aspects of it, what personally I could feel these ideas alive in the cathedral itself. And of course, not just me, because it receives many pilgrims and has for hundreds of years. So the cathedral itself was built around 1200. It was also a bit later, also the site of a very famous school of mystical philosophers. As I mentioned, it is a pilgrimage site, and it's a pilgrimage site for several reasons, but the main one is that it houses the so-called Sancta Camisa, which is said to be the tunic worn by the Virgin Mary at Christ's birth. So this alchemical Mary, this Mary symbolism is going to be quite strong in this cathedral, as I want to show you. But as a little intro to this, you could even see at the top of the cathedral, I have zoomed in here, it's still a little bit hard to see, that the 2 towers are crowned with the sun and moon. And they're even referred to as the solar tower and the lunar tower. So you can see the moon a bit more easily here, but on the other tower there is the sun. The sun one is even, I think, a little bit higher in terms of its measurements, if I'm remembering right. So you're sort of being invited, just in the very presence of this cathedral, into the idea of these polarities, into this idea of resolving these polarities through a kind of rebirth process. And this idea is symbolized at the very height of this cathedral, at the very top of these two towers. And these are the two towers right on the front entrance on the west. So I'm showing a couple of books here as well. In the 1960s, this book in the middle, well, they're both in French, but the one in the middle has been translated into English, was written much older, written in the 1960s. This book was written by Louis Charpentier, who said that alchemy and sacred architecture are inseparable. Or why would he say something like this? It seems sort of simple, but I just want to reflect on this for a second. First, we must assume there is a kind of beginning. We must first posit a creation and a creator or a designer of this creation. So in other words, a demiurge, an architect. This architect creates matter, the material world, and the human form from dust and dirt, from the mineral element. It raises up the lower element to be closer to its own state, that of divinity, of light and reason. The human being who is now in possession of these same abilities, can either leave the material world as it was given, or it can build it into art, to poeticize it, to elevate it into something. And in the process of turning matter into art, the matter, the stone, the glass, in the case of this cathedral, all of it is raised closer to the state of its creator, the human, who is one step removed from the divine. So it is the same with alchemy, which is why Charpentier goes on to say that the science hidden in Chartres Cathedral is in fact that of transformation or a new birth for a new humanity. And the other book that I put on the screen here, this is a book by more about various alchemical sites. I'm just noticing they have the same last name. I should have looked if these people are related. Maybe they are, but it's not the same person, I'm pretty sure. But this other book shows lots of sites in France that are that is interpreted alchemically, and so some of the Chartres is in there. Some of the interpretations of Chartres that I'm going to share now I am taking from this book. So we start on the north portal of the cathedral, and in the north portal, you have to sort of be standing there for a while to notice this, but hidden within the pillars there are these demons, or these animal faces and animal forms. They're trapped in the stones. And this is the reference to the parts that need to be overcome, this animalistic nature that needs to be worked on, fashioned into something new. The idea here is that the cathedral itself, why they're sort of built in there, but there's holes so you can see them, the cathedral has overcome them itself by building them into it, transforming them into the stone, into this structure. And the other famous part of this north portal is that you can see in the center of the doorway there is the figure of Anne, who is the mother of Mary. And I have a close-up for it on the side of the screen there, so you can see the head of Mary is missing, but her expression here is very serious and very stern. And this whole portal is quite esoteric as symbolism, just littering it. The zodiac is there, all of the props, you're surrounded by the zodiacs, the prophets, and so on. And she holds baby Mary in her hand. And above her, you see Christ and Mary enthroned together. So, of course, in my opinion, this is kind of big clue about what's going on here. And I can just zoom in a little bit, that this Mary symbolism and this Christ symbolism is connected, is in fact enthroned together. And you can see the angels here, and also the, I don't know if you can see this, but there's sort of like wavy, watery looking roof to the whole thing. And this is usually to symbolize that this is in the spiritual realm, this image is, and beneath you can see the rows of angels, and then beneath them, like birth and death is happening, and well, it's death in this case. So there's a sort of division here, and above, within the realm of the spirit, in the cosmic realm, Christ and Mary are here symbolized together. And you'll see this motif again in the west portal, which I want to turn to now. In the first tympanum, which is in the top corner here, this shows the Christ self, this wisdom-filled self, still in the spiritual realm. And you can see this by this water being poured out by the two angels on either side, and he's sort of standing in this water that's under his feet and covering the floor. He's being attended to by angels, and this is the Christ self is up there in the spiritual realm. And then beneath it, you see these angels, again, this sort of the angelic hierarchy, the sphere of the angels. And then beneath them, you see the prophets. And the prophets is like, now we're in the material world, but they are sort of, one could say, a little bit more attuned to what's happening up at the top than ordinary people, the idea would go. So some of them are sort of looking up there and seeing what's coming down from above. And so the second tympanum, which is beneath it, shows this Christ self, this wisdom-filled Christ self entering into the real, into time and space, into the material. And how is it doing this? Through the appearance of this geometrical, the so-called mystic almond, which in medieval esotericism symbolized Our Lady's virginity. So in other words, birth. He's being born into the world here. And then the final tympanum, which is a bit larger here that you see, most important in a certain sense. This shows the Christ self, this new Christ self, reborn Christ self, enthroned on the lap of what I want to call the alchemical Mary. And this theme you find all throughout the cathedral. It's very important. It's the motif is in iconography and Catholic art. The iconography of Catholic art is referred to as the throne of wisdom. Sometimes it's one of the many forms that Mary can take. And there's the Latin phrase also that's used for the seat of wisdom or throne of wisdom. But of course, this is a key to the whole process that I'm wanting to describe here, which is Mary is seated on a throne with the cosmic Christ child on her lap, giving birth to wisdom. The word wisdom is even here in the iconography. And again, you find this motif all throughout the cathedral. So here you see it on the front, the west portal, but inside, one of the shard is known for all of its beautiful stained glass, of course. And this is one of the oldest ones that I attempted to take a picture of with my not good photo equipment, just my cell phone, basically. But I've attempted to get it as clear as possible through some editing. This is one of the oldest windows in the cathedral, and you can see this image here. So this is a Romanesque period we're talking about. So it's a sort of Romanesque, pre-Gothic, but right on the line here. But it has the Romanesque features of this image quite clearly, of this same motif, this throne of wisdom, this Mary throne of wisdom giving birth to the Christ consciousness, this wisdom-filled Christ consciousness. So we then will go into the cathedral. And so the first thing one encounters upon entering the cathedral, which is a very serious part, and of course is quite famous as well. Chartres is quite famous for this thing, and that is the labyrinth. And so they still use the labyrinth, and it's supposed to be like praying, basically, the use of this labyrinth. So when you come to visit it normally, maybe some of you have been there, it's just the chairs are all over it, but they still remove the chairs for certain times to use it as it's meant to be used, which is a kind of praying, very serious practice, this labyrinth. So the idea would be that you would see the sun and the moon from far away. You would then reach the portals and see this imagery on the portals. You would then come into the cathedral and walk the labyrinth to arrive at the center. And the amount of stones in this labyrinth actually amounts to the number of days it takes to gestate a baby. So it's about 272 stones. I checked this online, and they say it's like 280 days approximately. So it's close. It nevertheless works. It's It's considered by many, though, who have studied the cathedral, that this number of stones in this labyrinth is symbolic of the days of human gestation. And so in the center there is a metal plaque. There's nothing there. You just sort of arrive at this this center point to be reborn, something new. So it's interesting that there is also just a little side note to that, that there's no one buried in Chartres. There's no cemetery or anything like that. And this is because the whole idea of this cathedral is about this rebirth. It's about birth, giving birth to the Christ-filled, the wisdom-filled Christ child. So also in the cathedral, there are two Black Madonnas that are kept. One is the so-called Lady of the Pillar, and the other is the Lady of the Subterranean Realm, or the Under Earth. And you can see pictures of both of them here for you to look at. The one of the pillar is obvious, is on one of the old pillars from the screen. It has been cleaned recently, and so it now looks like not a Black Madonna, but we'll keep going with the symbolism here, because it was famously known as a Black Madonna for a very long time, until recently when it was cleaned, and now it's like a white Madonna. But nevertheless, the symbolism here is important, because you can see there are the lights above her, and then there are also the stars. You can see them when I zoomed in here. The stars are represented around her in this dome, this half dome here, and she's crowned, and she's also carrying this Christ child, and she's also holding the apple. So all of this very important symbolism. And on the other side here, this is a bit more special picture, actually, because this is the Black Madonna from under the earth, as it's called. And then this one is in fact a Black Madonna, as you can see. And this one is only taken out once a year. And so the Black Madonna in this alchemical motif we're following, this is like encounter with the death forces, right? But it's also the rebirth forces, because it symbolizes the prima materia, the prime matter out of which the new is generated, the new cosmic and eternal. And it's this prima materia which gives this eternal life, this rebirth. And so that is why she's kept in the crypt, because once a year she must be dug out of the earth, like a miner or something. And this is this alchemical gesture of taking the prima materia out of the materiality itself, out of the earth. And in the crypt of Chartres, where this Black Madonna is kept, there's also a very old sacred well down there, which is where the Black Madonna is kept, by this well. So this well was there prior to the cathedral, when it was apparently a pagan, so-called pagan site. And it's still, many churches have wells like this, as probably many of you know. And so the well is down there, and that's where they keep this Black Madonna. There was an older Black Madonna down there, apparently from Celtic times, and it was destroyed. It was carried out and destroyed in front of the cathedral during the French Revolution. So the story goes, and then we get this one. But of course, some have speculated that this older Black Madonna was in fact an Isis statue. But it's interesting and important that there's this presence of this well and this Black Madonna, and that even to today, the two are kept together down there, because it's the sacred well with the Black Madonna, which symbolizes the fountain of life, symbolizes the water of rebirth. And it's also symbolized in later Christian art by the so-called Mary fountain, which I'll show you some images of in a second. But once a year, when they take this Lady of the Subterranean Realm out of the crypt, she's carried through the town as well, in order to cleanse the town and to give it a new birth, to purify and cleanse it so that it can be reborn. And then it is taken into the cathedral and put by the altar, so that also this can happen with the cathedral, that it can also be reborn. So I just have some images, some videos that I took. When I was there, this was happening. I actually didn't plan this. And it happened to be the day when they take it out. So I was walking with them, and here you can see me helping these Templar guys parade this Black Madonna all through the town on this, this sort of parade float or something, and then it's carried into the cathedral, and then it's set in there for I think about a week, and you can see it on the side here, and here they are having a service and praying, and they brought out some relics also, and you can also see in the background the kind of main altarpiece, a later one, obviously, or a later style at least, of Mary, which I'm going to come to in a second because that's also important. But I wanted to mention this motif is not in the cathedral. But it's important, I think, for what I'm talking about, because here we see an actual iconographic representation of the so-called fountain of life, this fountain of wisdom and knowledge and rebirth, this Mary fountain. And in the one in the center here, you can even see that people are drinking out of it and so forth, and being kind of nourished from within the earth. So I just wanted to show you so you can get an idea of what I meant by that. But the main altarpiece then in the cathedral itself is this Ascension, carved this Ascension statue. And the idea here is that when Mary ascends, this is the moment of rebirth. The wisdom-filled inner Christ child is born as Mary ascends. So there's this kind of elevation process of the whole thing is sort of elevated to the next level. And this can facilitate the rebirth of the new human, of what I'm calling this wisdom-filled Christ self. And I'm going to end, when you leave the cathedral, you get a very clear representation, in my opinion, of how this whole story is supposed to end here. And that is with this statue, also quite well known. And it's important that this is on the south portal of the cathedral, because this is the side that gets the most sunlight. It's where the most sun strikes the building. And here you actually see this new Christ-filled self represented, this Christ as initiate motif. And so what we see is this, he's in between the two doors on the door jamb there. He's standing on two beasts, and these beasts are the animal nature that we have been covering, also the polarities. So by standing on them, he's overcome these polarities, overcome this animal nature. They're under the feet of Christ. So on one side, you can try to show this, it's a bit hard to see. Under one foot is a dragon who ends in a serpent, and that's on the far side. I actually didn't get a picture of this, so I found one on the internet, but you can see the front is a dragon, and then it starts to turn, there's like a wing there, and then from the dragon, and then it turns into a serpent. And on the other one is the lion. So the lion here, so this symbolizes overcoming both the material world in the lion, the material world, which is fixed and stultifying and so on, the death forces, and then the spiritual world, which is symbolized by this fluid shape from dragon to snake. But the dangers of this side also about delusion, vague mystic fantasies, and irrational emotional volatility, giving into the passions, and so forth. So this fixed state and this volatile state are here. Then these polarities are overcome. They're overcome in this Christ statue. Christ is initiate. This is the new human. But the idea is that they've also been harmonized. So not just overcome, but the ultimate goal of this alchemical path, this alchemical lunar path that I've been describing to you in my own creative way, is the overcoming of these and the harmonizing of them. And the whole gesture of the statue itself is one of harmonizing these things rather than sort of fighting them and stabbing them or something. They've merely been they're still sort of part of him. They've been transformed through him. And I'm about at 44 minutes. So I think that I will stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jedediah. for that wonderful presentation. And I'm just going to change the view on the screen here for the sake of the recording, so that when people are speaking, like now, we get to see the person who's speaking or asking you questions. So I'd like to open this up now for anybody to ask any particular questions of Jedediah about the presentation and the content of the presentation. So I'd ask, if you do have questions you'd like to ask, or comments or observations, to please let me know by in the reactions icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You'll see you can raise your hand. So thank you. First hand raised, which is not surprising, is from the wonderful mob that are gathered at the Atlantis bookstore in London. So over to you all.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Jedediah. I wasn't expecting your talk to go in that direction, and I'm actually so excited that you did. The Alchemy of Mary has been very close to me in my own path, and I kind of came to this through the imagery of the Annunciation, and that a descent of Gabriel, the mercurial Holy Spirit, into Mary, the kind of albedo, purified material form in a bedchamber, that internal world. And it's my daily practice revolves a lot around praying of the Rosary and the mysteries of the Rosary, and then contemplating on them in alchemical terms has been really important to me, actually. So I want to thank you, because you've given me a lot of new areas to take those contemplations down. And it's just so exciting and encouraging to see other people thinking in these ways. My question would be kind of something where my contemplations are still trying to figure this out. In the mysteries of the Rosary, of course, you go through the Annunciation, the joyful mysteries, the birth of Christ, and then you have the sorrowful mysteries, the kind of scourging of and crucifixion of Christ, and then the glorious mysteries, the resurrection and ascension, which is then followed by Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit upon Mary and the apostles, and then Mary's assumption and coronation. And you've given me a lot to think on those terms about Christ emerging, dying, resurrecting, but then of course returning to Mary. So my question then would be, what do you think of the crucifixion in this sense, the crucifixion of Christ in alchemical terms? Because if I struggle a little bit with seeing Mary as albedo, the emergence of the rubido Christ, but then what's the death and resurrection of Christ about?
Yes, thank you for your comment. It's also very nice to, very validating actually, that to hear that you also are already working with these images, and that you have a kind of a practice using some of these motifs that I wasn't really sure how people were going to respond to it. So thank you for that. That's wonderful. It's a good question. I mean, I focused on just this one part of it. I know the way that I would interpret it, and I tried to mention it a little bit in here, but I didn't show this. Like, you can also find images of the crucifixion in which the sun and the moon are represented in the sky, both of them, like a Masonic lodge or something. And for me, this is another reference to this harmonizing of polarity, I suppose. It's probably the way I would think about it. So what is this crucifixion about? And of course, there's all the window dressings and so forth that you mentioned that I'm not sure what to say about that, about the scourging and things like this. Of course, other esoteric philosophers in the 19th century and then beginning of the 20th century have talked about this and have their ideas for what, for example, these stages mean on the path, right? But for me, I would interpret it in the sense of these relating to the harmonizing, overcoming, resolving of these polarities. And not only do you see this, in the sun and the moon, it's not always, when I'm going around looking at churches and so forth, you don't always see, for example, the sun and the moon in the sky. It's only certain places. You find it a lot in Eastern Europe, like in the Orthodox Church and so forth as well. So this is a reference to these polarities, but it's not just them. It's also, in my opinion, in the two thieves being crucified on either side. And of course, one of these thieves repents and one does not. And there's like, some esoteric lore about this as well, that, Lucifer can be redeemed, but that Satan will not be redeemed. So there's a little bit more perhaps you could dig into there, but for me, I think that the safest bet would be thinking about these polarities of a solar polarity overly materialistic, and a lunar polarity of overly, let's just say it, overly spiritual in a certain sense, just to make it simple. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm very happy to hear that you found the presentation helpful.
Does anybody else in London have any questions or observations, please?
That's a yes.
Carry on.
Oh, hi there. Thank you very, very much for that. That was absolutely fascinating.
Can you hear Sid?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
My name's, I'm not very familiar with Rosicrucian thought. A friend of mine who's very involved in this. I was talking with him about alchemy recently, and he suggested the Minerva study group, and that's why I'm here today. A couple of things I wanted to raise. I'm very familiar with Jungian thought and Gnosticism to a certain degree in Sophia. Sophia came up a couple of times in what you said. I was wondering whether you can expand a little bit on what for you the symbolism of Sophia is within the symbolism that you were talking about, and also within the general view of the Trinity and the Pantheon, if you like, in this view of things. Am I right in thinking that Sophia is an embodiment of the wisdom aspect of the Christ consciousness? And in that case, is Christ consciousness something bigger or different from Sophia, or are they interchangeable? That was just one of my questions. The other thing was just a quick reflection, actually, which is that what you were talking about, the spires on the roof, from my understanding of Jung, the lion is often representative of the animal-mammal instincts, and the connection of the ego to that, as well as solar consciousness, whereas dragon and the black serpent are interchangeable in terms of representations of the deeper part of the unconscious, which I've always seen as part of the reptile brain as opposed to the mammal brain. So it seemed to be rather satisfying, the image that you finished with, where not only is the Christ consciousness self standing on those two things, but actually integrating was the word that sprang to my mind when you were wrapping up, not through the self, the animal spirits, but also the deep unconscious. And in a way, the Christ figure can be seen as standing on the sun and the moon, i.e. the conscious and the unconscious. So I thought it was rather beautiful symbolically the way that all wrapped together. But I guess my main question is just to ask you a little bit more about where you feel Sophia fits in on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comment. That's wonderful to hear about what you mentioned about this dragon serpent part of it, because it's a bit intuitive for me thinking about it, but that makes perfect sense to me, that even this more emotional, spiritual side that I was talking about, this would be the more deeper rooted, difficult part to transform, and so that actually fits very well with the way I was thinking about it. And of course, I know of Jung, and I know his extensive work on alchemy, and I've given a presentation before where it was about spiritual alchemy, and of course, then I want to rely heavily on Jung because it just fits. It's a great example, and he was a very gifted thinker and esotericist who thought all this out. But it's also been done a lot, at least in some of the circles that I've been in. So I was just attempting to try to, how could I talk about this without resorting to this psychological angle? So it's a bit of an experiment, even though the psychological, the Jungian interpretations fit very well, as you just mentioned there. So that's a little bit why maybe I didn't pull on Jung, but for something like that, especially at the end, but it fits very nicely with what I was thinking about. And of course, that image is a very striking image in and of itself. And you don't at Chartres Cathedral, the one I ended with. But the other question about is more kind of a theological question, I suppose, and that's a difficult one for me. You know, theology itself is nothing but a kind of endless debates and different interpretations and so on. So I don't know that I have a good answer for that, but I think what I would have to say, because of the kind of place that we are, the kind of context in which we are in, is, you know, there's Catholicism, then there is something like Orthodox Christianity, there's Protestantism, but then there's these Gnostic traditions, which were, some of them still existed and some didn't, but we've found more of their texts. The texts around the beliefs were there and are around now. People, can read them. So like some have the Trinity, some do not. Some have a place for Sophia specifically, some do not. Some it's more a bit vague. In fact, a lot of places it's vague all over the place, just for the idea of the throne of wisdom, for example. Is this a reference within Catholic iconography to Sophia or not? You know, I mean, some might say yes, some might argue that it's not. But what the alchemists did, if we're in a sort of esoteric context, right? Esotericists and alchemists, especially with this alchemical Mary, they basically just took the image and did what they wanted with it. They appropriated it, in other words. So in the two books I mentioned, that's their argument, that the Catholic Mary symbolism is there for a long time. Theologians argued about it. Protestants, of course, famously wanted to break with the Catholics over some of this Mary stuff, you know. But what the alchemists did was take this image and kind of repurpose it in an esoteric sense. So that's a bit what I'm doing with these images, to be frank. So I don't know that I would have it philosophically laid out, like divisions between, here's where the Sophia stands and works, here's where Mary stands and works, here is where this Christ archetype or something stands and works. In a certain sense, I'm conflating the Sophia with the Mary. This sort of just this whole notion of the cosmic virgin of Mary, especially in the throne of wisdom. In this sense, so Mary is Sophia giving birth to the Christ child. However, the Christ child is the extension of it, is the wisdom-filled consciousness. So I don't know that we could even separate them in a certain sense, that it's sort of a link between the two, which is the Sophia, you know, something like this. And that's a very, not very precise answer, but partly because I don't have a good answer for that. And that's probably the way I'd work it out for myself, because even when you read the alchemists talking about Mary or something, or you know, this sort of feminine archetype has various modes, even like the apocalyptic woman, this virgin, the natura, then there's Sophia. A lot of times these are even conflated to a certain extent. So I guess my answer then would be, like, I'm really stuck on this throne of wisdom. It's maybe the clearest reference we have to this Sophia archetype. So I think it is the maybe the process even. It's not the Christ child, it's not the Mary, those can also be distinct, but this interaction that I'm trying to describe here, this is the work of Sophia. Maybe this is how I would answer it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to offer some thoughts, please. In some of the images that you shared with us, which were very beautiful, by the way, I thoroughly enjoyed the imagery of your presentation. There were images of Mary with a crown of stars. In relation to Sophia, I'd like to just share some feelings I have about the subject. That the crown of stars is an indication that Sophia is a symbol of us, if you like, the energy or the force throughout all creation of empathy, compassion, and love, the ultimate feminine principle in all creation, and sometimes referred to as the Queen of Heaven. If we think that heaven is out there somewhere, that, I think, is, we fall foul of this very often, very frequently. that we feel that heaven is elsewhere and not here. And if we were to align ourselves or engage in the process of inner transformation and communion through whatever means we choose, and to engage in an alchemical process, one of the things that we can attune with is this universal power of empathy and compassion and love. And therefore, it naturally cultivates within the individual these qualities: empathy, compassion, and love. But if we have genuine universal empathy, not selective empathy, then we need to be very careful to not fall foul of dogma, symbolic dogma. So for instance, in some of the images, there were depictions of animals in various forms and various kind of situations. And as you mentioned, in your personal opinion, the animals are there to represent the lower nature within the human being. I think that this is dogma. And I think that it does a great disservice to the sacred spirit of the natural world. We tend to think of animals as lesser than humans, and that they symbolize the lower aspects of our nature. I think that this is dogma, and I think that it's holding back the progress of humanity. The longer we hold on to such dogma, the more we just continue to repeat the same cycles of aggression and destruction. You'll probably all be familiar with the saying from the Bible that just one second, please. That it's the stone that the builder rejected shall become the head cornerstone. I feel that in many ways, the animal kingdom and nature in general is the stone which the builders rejected. We don't see the value in nature. And one of the main reasons for this study group is to share a mutual exploration of the hidden mysteries of nature and science. So I'm going to shut up. Thank you very much for listening. And I want to hand that back over to you, Jedediah, to see if you have any thoughts on the comments I just made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for your reflections. And of course, I'm of a similar mind, to be honest. And even when I'm writing this presentation and writing the interpretations about the lower self, the animal nature, the so-called lower nature, and so forth, I'm of course aware of the kind of outdatedness of this, you know. I do it nevertheless in this case because it fits with what I wanted to present in the kind of especially in a more kind of traditional alchemical framework, perhaps. But at the same point, in my personal life, I'm giving a presentation here, but like in my personal own spiritual path, I'm not thinking about the animals or nature for that matter as especially external to me as something that must be overcome or somehow lesser. In fact, it's quite the opposite for me personally. When I'm meditating or something, I go out into nature, get away from the people. Those are the ones that need to be overcome in this sense, and me, my connection to them. And it's within nature and within interaction. Let's say if a deer comes by, it's within moments like this, if I'm out meditating, that that's where the divine, this hidden, the real stuff really shows up. So I'm in full agreement with you. And of course, I would not, I was aware of this when I put it in there. And if I were working on something and more systematic or something, I wouldn't resort to these kinds of symbols, you know, because they have this dogma even that you're talking about. So that's my first response to that. But nevertheless, where it is useful, I think, and this is where I tried to still brought it in either anyway, is because it is true that there are differences between humans and animals. And so granted, this is also sort of traditional perhaps outmoded, we could talk about it, philosophy. The human being is apparently able to make a decision to counteract passions and drives, emotions, so forth, something like this. And so there is something about the spiritual development that nevertheless has to do with encountering, and again, we have to, like, I don't like this language either, but I'm just going to resort to it, something like base instincts, you know, fighting, feeding, effing, the other F, I won't say it, but so those are still in there. You can represent those any way you wanted to. And in fact, I wouldn't represent them as animals nowadays. Of course, in the Middle Ages, this was a huge thing. This is what everyone was doing, as I showed. Nevertheless, those have to be, in my opinion, somehow transformed as part of this process. Those really, though, have nothing to do, for me at least, with the actual animals out in nature or the living plant world. You know, this for me is also something else. But I do have those things within me, and this animal lower nature motif is one way one could talk about it. But of course, it's not the only way. And I agree with you that we shouldn't just have this one way to talk about this process. In fact, there should be lots of ways. And my whole focus on creativity and subjectivity, I hope, would sort of lend itself to that. Like, this is not some kind of, I don't want it to be a dogma at all. This is just a sort of vision to think about, and let's get more visions, you know?
Thank you very much indeed, Jedediah. That's wonderful. I'd like to open this up again. I still notice that we have the hand raised from the people in London. So is there anybody else there in London that would like
yes, it's a question for me, actually. Well, an observation and a question for me. I was lucky enough that I walked the Camino de Santiago just before COVID hit. And wherever you go, whichever church you stop in, the Camino seems to be a sort of wonderful medieval PR campaign for the power of Catholicism. Wherever you go into these tiny little towns, there's huge cathedral type edifices which should belong in Rome. And I think I was in Pamplona, and I'd arrived, and the sun was setting, and I sat in the cathedral on my own, and there was a statue of Mary. And everywhere you go in the Camino, it's gold. Everything is gold, 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 gold. And she was made out of silver. And I sat there for an hour or so, contemplating this and thinking, okay, hold on a minute. You know, we're always surrounded by gold. We're always surrounded by the solar aspects. And here is this very important icon who is built out of a physical lunar aspect, and started to think about the concept of the Immaculate Conception and the virgin birth. And because there are many sort of pseudo-Mesopotamian myths about gods being born of virgins, and I started to think about the concept of let's take the concept of this person called Yeshua ben Joseph and remove him from the physical, and think about it from an allegorical perspective. And what we always say, there is always this distinction between what the Old Testament and the New Testament is. The Old Testament, you know, Yahweh is a very angry, jealous, spiteful, vengeful God, and that within the New Testament and the birth of Christ is the birth of love. Like, that is when love was supposed to enter into the consciousness of mankind. And so I was thinking about well, theoretically, yes. So this lunar aspect is birthing a new era of man. I mean, it's a allegorical birth, which, you know, this myth is birthing a new era of mankind where love, the great balm, love and forgiveness are entering into the human consciousness. And so for those literalists out there who always talk about how can a God be born of a virgin? But, you know, if you think about it from the allegorical perspective, that the concept of the virgin birth stands up, because it is about the consciousness of mankind being reborn and rebirthed into a new era. And I suppose my question is, it's very nice for having had these thoughts all on my own with a beaten pair of walking boots after walking 35 kilometers that day. To have seen these ideals in the presentation, but have you seen similar aspects in any other of these sort of pre-Christian myths of gods born of virgins? I suppose is my question.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing. It's very nice that you were able to make that pilgrimage and see some of that. I've been going around in Central Europe looking at churches just on my own pilgrimage, I suppose, recently. But so I guess the way maybe I could explain a little bit, like I'm not a Catholic. I'm not really a member of any religion. You know, I'm interested in lots of religions. I'm a spiritual person. But of course, where I am in Central Europe, the history is a Catholic history going back to the Roman times, and then and sort of kind of indigenous histories prior to that. So that's why I brought this this reflective part, that in my experience of some of these symbols, similar to what you were talking about, like encountering this art, this devotional art, it would be different in a different context as well. But encountering this devotional art, whether or not, to what degree you are embedded in the religion or not, you have these experiences. It's possible to have some kind of experience, some kind of feeling. There is definitely something working within these forms, within these pictures, within these sculptures, within the chosen set of symbols, even with the presentation, the way they're presented, and so forth. And so this is also why I turned to that in response to other ways that one could talk about this rebirth thing. So if we're looking at like alchemy proper, I don't know about this, of course, about the ancient world. Maybe I'll get to that in a second, but it sort of relates. Like in alchemy proper, they use mythology, like so-called pagan motifs, right? Especially in the early modern period, there was like a renaissance of all this stuff. And so they're using Greek and Roman mythologies, religion, really, in their alchemical work. And so you do find references to, as I mentioned, like the birth of Athena from the head of Zeus. And the whole notion of creating a homunculus, or of giving birth, the alchemist giving birth to a new child, there is a kind of strain of thought that has criticized all that this is a very sort of male-oriented activity. That the birthing process, at least traditionally, was this is what the realm of women. This is what women could do. Men could not do this part of it. But within the alchemical tradition, even within certain motifs of spiritual development, like this Athena thing, this can be sort of taken over into a more solar, I guess we could say, if we want to use this paradigm, this more male-oriented approach. And that's why I've thought a lot about creating the homunculus, and many alchemical books showing from this period, showing men going to give birth, and they go out and collect all of the fluids that normally go with birth and what to make in order to make a birth. Like they need all these fluids also, and they gather them from God knows how they gathered them. I'm sure you could find it if you researched it, ways they gathered some of this stuff. And they brought it together to try to make to give birth. It's an interesting motif. I think that there is a history of that also. I mentioned just the Athena thing just because it's one reference, but you could also find more references about this. I don't interpret the whole thing quite that literally, but that is there, this criticism that I just mentioned. I think, there is something more to it, like what you're talking about, that it's a figurative birth also. But that's why I tried to then shift it also back to Mary here, to even though I run the risk of sort of resorting to these animalistic nature, traditional binaries and paradigms and so forth, I nevertheless did this and brought in this quote unquote lunar stream to see, like, if you shifted this back to Mary and incorporated the so-called, I'm gonna say regular, but this female male birth. True. If you incorporated this back in and focus on it this way, in this alchemical needing to give rebirth, how could you do that? It's a bit of a challenge to do this, and this is the way I did it. So that's part of what's going on here, why I am using some of these ideas, because you're right that there is a tradition of even in ancient religions this giving birth, as a kind of metaphor for spiritual development, or sort of initiation. We could even say something like that. Like in the mystery cults, you would find in myths that most mystery cults are founded on, based on this. And in some of them, it's a female giving birth to male or female, or in some of them, it's this male to male birth. And so I don't know, I'm not informed enough to make any sort of meaningful statement about that, but just to give you some of my thoughts about why I was trying to shift it away from this homunculus thing over to focusing on Mary. And then it becomes very internally, very allegorical, because even the idea of like the cosmic virgins giving birth, there's clearly alchemical or allegorical layers here being introduced. And so that's was part of my intention there. So hopefully that maybe gives some kind of background to your question.
No, thank you. Thank you. I mean, as I think it was that thing of seeing the lunar Mary in physical form, and there sort of surrounded by, everywhere everything else was God, was something that a motif that really sort of struck home. But thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, personal thoughts and reflections here. I think that the notion of male to male birth is vanity on the part of man. There's a feminist author called Camille Paglia, and she wrote a book, I think it was called, what was it? Art and Violence or Sex and Nature. I'm paraphrasing the title there. But one of the things she wrote in there is that man has always been in awe of the mysterious power of the woman, and that women's power is hidden, it's on the inside, and that men, through their arrogance, let's say early caveman, believed that they could dominate nature because they had the ability to stand and piss on fire and put it out. And of course, if a woman tried to do that, generally speaking, she'd burn herself. And so there's a great quote from that book that man enters the woman in glory and leaves in decrepitude. And that there's an inherent fear of the miracle of birth and the hidden, mysterious spiritual power of the female. And my feelings are that those male to male birth kind of allegories or themes are an example of man's arrogance and vanity. I welcome any thoughts on this subject, please. Anybody?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me from here?
Yes, Martin, go ahead.
I would like to give the Rosicrucian traditional answer to some of the things we're musing about. I want to make clear at the beginning that this is just exactly what the Rosicrucian texts say. So it's the opposite to what we've been doing with our own insights. This is what the writings have in them. So we see in the Fama Fraternitatis what is largely seen by many people as the first of the Rosicrucian Manifesto, a sense that you should be learning from two books, the Bible and the Book of Nature. We see in the Confessio the same thing, but slightly rephrased. Now nature is the handmaiden of God. So we can see in what's happening in nature what higher rules are. And there's certainly an implication of both spiritual insights and scientific understanding. We see in other Rosicrucian works, we see in Comte de Gavis, that the works of nature are a a hieroglyph that can be decoded, so you can see the underlying forces. But we also start to see this animal analogy we're talking about. In that case, there's a comparison between Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, on an ass, he's in control of his lower nature. There is a term actually in there which is quite nice, is friends. So there's friends there. We also have in the Pegasus of the Firmament, which is another Rosicrucian manifesto, an idea of evolving the lower natures to what they're aiming to do. So they're not negative, they're your potential. That's all we have in what we'd see as the original Rosicrucian text, but there are writings of Rosicrucians whereby they have examined the same meditation we're having here. Henry Cornelius Agrippa, in his 4 books of occult philosophy, in the section on magic, actually looks at it's almost like a shamanic feel. You're going to learn the good things from the animals. But he does identify some clear areas of animal behavior that nobody would want to have in their own nature. So, for example, some animals, he quotes, when scared, will kill their own young rather than defend them. Some animals don't wait for consent in order to engage in reproductive activity. And that's not even, there's no consent in any of their behavior in that respect. And in many animals, the most angry, powerful, aggressive person is the person in charge of the pack. These are areas that need transformation. And we do see in Rosicrucian text an example of this happening. In the chemical wedding on the 7th day, there is a bird who is transformed, and the feeling of this transformation isn't anything like this is a terrible bird. They love it. It's a beautiful thing, but it does need to evolve. It needs to get to its next step. And I won't go into the process of it, but the bird is sort of baked and shined and transformed and improved in the way. So I think, what we're saying about respect and loving nature, but also knowing there are some things that we'd like to see in ourselves a bit better, which could be symbolized by natural figures. I think that's a traditional Rosicrucian take. So it's lovely to hear it coming out here. There were some other things we asked about Sophia and other things. I could give you the same kind of Rosicrucian angle on it, but it'd be the same. It has the same running time. So yeah. So if you'd like to hear them, let me know. Ask me privately later on. But how inspiring! How wonderful! Thank you very much for this talk.
Yeah, if I could just
go ahead, Jedediah, please.
respond to that. First of all, hello, Martin. Nice to see you. Of course, I know some of this, what you say, and this is why I included it nevertheless, because I, of course, love nature. I, of course, love animals. I know we are facing, currently in the current world, difficulties with nature and animals and so forth. But nevertheless, within these medieval traditions and within these Rosicrucian traditions and the alchemical traditions, this was the way you described it. This was the kind of schema, that was used. And there's a reason why it was used, because there are some truths to it, as you mentioned. I think that it's also true that we're trying to rethink things nowadays, which is exactly what the Rosicrucians were doing in their own time. So it's not, for me, it's not a problem that people are trying to rethink these older methods and come up with new versions and so forth. But nevertheless, there is this root issue about transformation, which has to do with precisely what you're talking about, that there are, a scientific way to talk about it, if you want to use this sort of psycho language, is there are instincts and drives. Then there are these chemical processes, perhaps, if we want to get totally materialistic about it. There are these things that can be problematic, should one choose to transform them or not. In fact, symbolizing them as animals in nature and so forth could be a less materialistic way to go about it. It depends on, though, if you're able to kind of, if it turns into a dogma or as like a helpful tool, you know, for thinking about your own spiritual development. So thank you for adding that. Just adds me a little bit more to my thinking about, of course, this whole issue of, you know, people don't even want to necessarily think that people have a lower nature. Like, what is this quote unquote lower nature anyway? Nowadays, this is a kind of a problematic thing to be talking about for many times for valid reasons because of history and so forth. But nevertheless, there are things that humans do that are very terrible, and a person can transform these things. There are methods to do this, spiritual methods, and this should also be important and be part of the conversation. So, just my thoughts based on what you said. So, thank you for adding that.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask of Jedediah, please? If so, please raise your hand or just ask. Please go ahead. Yes, who do we have here? 1 second. Oh, I think that's from London again. Please go ahead, whoever that is. Do we have somebody in London who wishes to ask a question or not?
I could say something quick while this guy is getting ready.
Go ahead, Charles.
I'm sorry, I didn't really catch all of what you said, but that last statement, I've always had to be cautious about, you know, when dealing with these kind of issues. You're right in that humanity, the state that we've always been in, we do some horrible things, and it could be argued, yes, we're getting better. But one of the things that I try to shy away from is giving people the illusion that, and when I say illusion, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's a lie. I'm just trying to make it sound like it's a thought process that they can continue on this way and that there's some spiritual way to fix it afterwards. I really hate giving people that sense of security. It's kind of like what the Catholic Church did that brought about the Protestant Reformation. When you talk like that, it's almost like offering the sale of indulgences again. So I always try to shy away from statements like that. And usually when I catch people that make them, you know, because there are a lot of people that talk about, you know, if you perform this ritual, you know, it'll heal you of this, or it'll remove that negative karma, or it'll do this. You know, when it's better just to tell people, hey, look, get your act together, behave yourself. And yes, you're going to reap what you sow in the end. So all that stuff you did before is waiting for you. And if you don't stop it, when it hits you, it's going to hit harder than you hit before. That was it.
Charles, thank you very, very much. I personally find that very interesting thoughts. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Where in the world are you?
Right now, I'm living in Denmark. I'm ex-American.
Okay, hello. Good to see you. Just
hi, sorry about the video.
That's okay.
It was just that, like I said, it was a mess today. I had to pick my stepson up, and
that's fine.
Guess I can call him that.
Yeah, I'm really loving the wings on the shoulders there. That's great.
Well, actually, you know, I wish that I ran into you even in my teens. I used to love these kind of talks.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that we've met now, because now the time is now, eh?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that there's something going on now where the world is going to have to make a choice, or we're not going to like the outcome. And
I wholeheartedly agree with this.
Wow, see, that's scary.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping all this is just going to blow over as a blip, but
I wholeheartedly agree with you, sir. And this for me, it goes back to what we were exploring about Sophia, and I was saying about aligning ourselves. The alchemical process is really about aligning ourselves, I feel personally, with love and goodness.
Actually, every religion that practices morality,
yes,
is saying exactly the same thing, doing exactly the same thing. They just approach it from different angles and will use different words.
yes,
But they mean exactly that.
yeah, agreed.
So that's actually quite universal. You don't even have to isolate it to alchemy. You can say that touches this basic human fundamental idea that the only way we can have heaven is if we clean up our act here on the earth. And the only way that's going to happen is if we head in that direction, where we're aligning ourselves with these ideas, because that becomes the first stage, like you were saying. You know, that's part of that transformational process.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I'm really, really glad you spoke up. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Any thoughts on this, Jedediah, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your reflections. Also, I find it, I can sympathize also with feeling this way in the current world, and yeah, struggling with it, trying to think through it, what to do, and so on. So yeah, it's funny that this whole talk became very deep by the end of it here. But I guess the only thing I would add to it is I also agree with what you were saying at the beginning about this whole idea. And this is again why I included this animal, lower nature motif, because I do, even though it's true that we want to, change our ideas about animals for various reasons, that's a separate issue in a certain sense compared to these things inside of you that need to be worked on, ought to be worked on. This is a separate issue. And the whole thing about, well, okay, if you, I've also heard this before too, like in another life, I'll fix this particular problem. I'm not going to do it now. I can't figure my way out through it or something like this. This is also in those polarities where I would put that in these polarities I was talking about. This is like, in when I was talking about the solar and the lunar extremes, extreme materialism on the one hand, or extreme like spirituality, or extreme, this extreme other pole, this spiritual pole. This is where this is one of the dangers in that pole, in my opinion, of this sort of delusion. You use the word illusion, but I had said delusion. The dangers within the spiritual pole are delusion. The dangers in this other pole are, reduction, materialism, denial of spiritual things and spiritual realities, something like that. So I agree with you on that, and that's how I was kind of thinking about it. That's how I normally think about it, actually, is I have these kind of two.
I was just scared to use the word delusion. I really was.
Yeah.
So you're braver than me.
Yeah. Well, hey, illusion, delusion. I mean, the danger is the delusion part, because a person, once you're in delusion, then you're really in danger. If you see an illusion, it's possible to pass by. But if you're caught in delusion, then you're in a lot of trouble, because then you have to backtrack. You have to get yourself out of it.
Yes, I agree 110%. That's actually when you can say, all right, the way I was taught alchemy, that's really what it was supposed to be about, that backtracking process. That, okay, you're in the middle of, I just woke up and I'm in hell. So yes, in the sense that there's some spiritual things you could do, fine, that you can get out of this mess, fine. But to be standing outside of hell and then walking into it because some spiritual practice is, or the bottom line, the truth of the matter is, you see some luxury that just you assume will make your life more convenient, or make you outshine your neighbor or whatever else, you step into it. To me, that is like the big danger, you know. But yes, when you find yourself, all of a sudden you're waking up out of that delusion and you realize, oh, I'm in hell now. That to me was what alchemy was all about, you know. So that's why I was saying good talk. And this idea about the lower self, I haven't heard that kind of talk since I'm 62 now, no, 61 now. It must have been more than 40 years since I heard, and I've even tried using those words to Hindus, and they were looking at me like, what do you mean? So all of a sudden, this doesn't exist anymore, this term. So where did you get it from? Because to be honest with you, you know, I think it needs to be used more to help us understand that, you know, there is something in us, a nature, you can call it whatever you want, a devil, an evil spirit. But to me, it's just the lower side of your human nature. No, your animal nature. And that causes you to be territorial, causes you to be, you know, all those things driven by selfishness, you know, full of greed, full of hatred, full of more delusions. That term to me is a very useful term today, you know, because actually, when you're talking about the Eastern side of things, when you look at the Hindu Buddhist side of things, that term also helps you better understand their approach and why their approach is the way it is. You know, because they were the ones that started coining that phrase, and I don't know if they got it from the Egyptians or what, but the bottom line was this term was used to explain these other side of things so that you couldn't take the basic Christian approach and say, no, it was the devil, it wasn't me. You know, I'm not the bad person, it's the devil making me do it. You know, my father was the one that introduced me to Rosicrucianism. And one of our discussions was about Adam, you know, because this idea that a lot of preachers will talk about when they want to put women down, that it was actually the women that sinned and the man just, you know, out of love gave in, you know, to be with her. He told me that quite often, you know, we'll come up with all kinds of excuses just to do what we want. And the devil is one of the biggest excuses, especially so-called religious people like to use. But the truth of the matter is, no matter how you look at it, it'll be you in the end that has to live with it, not the devil. So don't go crying the devil made you do it, because you had a free choice. And you just chose wrong. So,
Charles, thank you very much.
Bringing back memories.
Thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing those memories with us. That's really, really valued and very, very, very thought-provoking. Thank you. I read an article only, I think it was yesterday actually, by an anthropologist, and they were talking about a species of ape known as the bonobo. I'm sure that we're all
I've heard of them.
familiar with them, and that it has been stated by anthropologists that humankind and chimpanzees are very, very, very closely related. And chimpanzee, their society is very violent. They're very confrontational, very territorial, and whereas the bonobo apparently displays characteristics that are much more physically, structurally similar to human, but their whole culture is based on love and cooperation. Admittedly, they have a tendency toward sexual interaction as a form of bonding, which goes way beyond our generally accepted sense of morality. But their culture, their society is very, very cooperative and love-based. And it's speculated that that humanity also has this capacity, and it's unfortunate that we get bombarded with through the news media and through political actions with those lower aspects of our nature, the warring, fighting, murderous aspects of our nature. But we do have such incredible capacity to love. And surely this is what humanity needs more of. We need to cultivate these qualities more so. This is the process of alchemy for me, what I believe the process of alchemy is really about. And it should engender a deeper experience of love and of compassion, empathy, unity, universal love. Jedediah, over to you if you have any thoughts on the subject here, on anything that's been discussed just recently.
Well, no, and mostly just listening. It's very interesting to hear all of your thoughts, and you know, a lot to think about there, and comparing them some of my own thoughts about things. Yeah, just enjoying listening. I don't know that I have much to add there. The only thought that I had as you all were talking was, I didn't go into this, but, and again, this is a kind of personal, oh, by the way, I don't know where I got the term lower self either, to be honest. I picked it up somewhere, I don't know. But my own like feeling about alchemy, the way I think about it sometimes, and I didn't go into this part, but it seems to be like it's trying to, if we were to bring back in this laboratory kind of external part of alchemy, one of the things that always fascinated me about alchemy was that, yes, there's this like argument about like, is it a psychological thing, or is it, you know, is it just proto-science? Is it a laboratory thing? And there are, of course, scholars of alchemy who are like Jung, who took a particular position, and more recent scholarship on alchemy takes another position about this proto-science thing. But you can't say it's either one of these. This is what's so fascinating about it. Like, there does seem to be something about the alchemist is definitely using instruments, definitely doing experiments, definitely in a laboratory doing stuff with matter. But the alchemist is also engaged in a spiritual practice at the same time. And this practice has to do with many of the things that we've been talking about. I mean, you're praying as you light the Bunsen burner. You know, why is this occurring? It's very different for us nowadays, where something like religion and science, the laboratory and the temple are not the same place for us. But I think perhaps there's something in that notion that could be useful for us going forward. And this is what also always fascinated me about alchemy, that it seems to be a way to think about the connection between science and religion in a certain sense, but it's much more specific than that, between a kind of spiritual, reverential approach to our interactions with matter, with nature, with the world. And at the same time, not just retreating into, you know, the devil made me do it or something like that. There is somehow at least an attempt to find this middle way here. So I think that's, I guess, all that I would add, and hopefully it relates to what everyone else was thinking. But that's partly like my own interest in finding something unique about it there.
Thank you, Jedediah. I'd like to hand over to Daniel, please.
Yeah, just to make a few small comments, which I think directly relate to other people's comments, so rather than a general discussion observations. And these might be helpful to those who've made the comments and they'll make the connections. I'll keep it brief. On the sense of connecting and being open to a sense of universal love and compassion, I think they are certain that that understanding and that experience is something which is testified to within the Hebrew scriptures and not simply within the New Testament. And of course, that is where Jesus Christ probably got the idea from, and highlighting a tradition that was within the Hebrew tradition already. And also, this links in with a few points. I think the Platonic and the Neoplatonic traditions also did have an understanding that an experience of cosmic and universal love was the ultimate binding element within the order of things. And I just wondered about the issues of animals, and I think maybe the Christian imagination did not do this well, and the Christian imagination didn't really take up and incorporate into its own worldview the more Neoplatonic and Platonic idea of animals still being related to aspects of soul. And in that sense, we are in close relationship as humans to animals because of the common experience of soul. So that just occurs to me as well. But there's maybe an oddity in the Christian imagination that animals almost take a sideline position, because the peculiar thing about Christianity, even now in comparison to many forms of religious practice, ideal or actual, is that the crucifixion of Christ actually ends animal sacrifice. And that's still quite an unusual spiritual perspective and religious practice even now to adopt. So the bloodless sacrifice of Christian worship is quite unusual. And I'm just connecting that with Neoplatonic notions of theurgy as worship, and the connection that within the theurgic operation, we become the sacrifice. So we become the bloodless sacrifice. And maybe there's something there in the centrality of the crucifixion within Christian worship, that the notion of the bloodless sacrifice is a stage within the theurgic process that we have to go through before the transformation aspect, in Christian terms, the transformation aspect of the bread and wine, or in other terms, our own transformation into embodying Christ consciousness. So that's just that connection with pre-Christian ideas of theurgy and sacrifice and crucifixion. And then finally, just many Renaissance imageries of the Annunciation. For the Freemasons who are present, this might be of interest. So many of the Annunciation images in Renaissance and medieval art will often show Mary with two pillars either side of her. One will often be in the shade and one often in the light. And I think the suggestion in those imageries is that Mary is the new temple. Those pillars represent the porchway to the temple. So Mary has become the new temple that is the dwelling place of divinity on earth. So it's just a nice other connection, kind of Mary connection with artistic representations. And once you know to look out for the two pillars, if you go into many churches or look in art, you'll start to see the pillars once you know to look for them. So yes.
Thank you, Daniel, very much indeed. The notion of the bloodless sacrifice as being a necessary stage in the process, the alchemical process, not only for the individual, but I would extend that further for throughout all humanity. That would be a step that I feel humanity needs to undertake in order to begin to make any genuine progress. I'd like to hand over to London again, to the Atlantis bookstore. Somebody there's had their hand up for a while.
Hello, me again. So there is actually both a biblical reference and indeed a Christian practice, which is learning from the lessons of animals and respecting them. The quote, I can't remember exactly, is from the book of Job, whereby the animals teach him, and they're sort of seen as a messenger of higher sort of knowledge. And the practice was something that started off in medieval times in books they called bestiaries, whereby you'd memorize different animals, and each one would have a wonderful lesson that you would press firmly in your heart. Now, the information about animals may not be quite as accurate as we have now. Everyone here knows, for example, a panther is a multicolored cat that can project a scent from its mouth that makes everyone either calm and happy or dance around it. And this, you memorize this as a lesson that the good things, that they have the right vibrations that kind of project outwards. And there's many animals like that. I won't list them all for you. I also wanted to add, and it might make us smile a bit, how things have switched. In terms of alchemy, if we were to look at the famous alchemists in Ptolemaic times in Egypt, they were all female. There were things like Mary the Jewess, Theosophia, these kind of things, and Cleopatra the alchemist. And indeed, in some of the contemporary texts, they're not sure if men will be able to do it, because chemistry or alchemy takes a lot of watching things and keeping them warm and caring and nurturing, and it would involve them having to learn something which was of a different polarity, which of course is part of the process you described. One lovely thing we can learn from this alchemical tradition of that time is that all these things we're talking about, to them, we're using that term lower, just need to be grown up to what they're aiming to do. So there actually are potential. You shan't reject them or look down on them. Interesting enough, it's very strange to think that Egyptian alchemists would be excited by Aristotle, yes, but the idea that everything had its good purpose, a seed grows into a tree. And the same was true in chemicals, and the same is true in your mind. So anything that is disruptive or negative behavior or anything which might look like an illness, if you look at what it's trying to do, you can help it find the healthy way you can grow it up. And isn't that alchemy? And isn't that the first quote that you gave us at the beginning, Jedediah, it was Paracelsus saying that true alchemy is bringing something to conclusion which is not yet completed. Anyway, did you put your hand up?
I did.
You subdued your animal nature?
Subdued my animal nature, yeah. Can you hear me, Sheen?
Yes.
It was actually just a thought about the Book of Nature and sort of, alchemical tinctures. And if you go to, the more shamanic traditions about plant dietas and learning what the plants have to say to us, in the same way, just thinking about what Martin was saying about the medieval things of spending time memorizing what specific animals do. If you go to there's a Shipibo tradition whereby you do a plant dieta for say a month or 2 months, and you sit and you just eat very, very plain food, but you spend a long time on your own just conversing with a specific plant. So that specific plant will then teach you its specific powers. And as a shaman increases his knowledge of all the plants, it's because he has spent time learning what the plant has to teach. And so the Book of Nature is both the animal kingdom and the vegetable kingdom, and of course the mineral kingdom. But I've spent time with the Shipibo, and their knowledge of the specific energetic properties of any specific plant at any one time within the lunar calendar or at any particular moment is absolutely fascinating, because they have spent maybe 2 months just in the presence of a single plant. So if we talk about the Book of Nature, and we've been talking about animals a lot, but we haven't actually spoken about the vegetation, and we haven't actually spoken about the plant kingdom. So that was just an observation, really. That's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I'd like to hand over to Sid. Thank you for your patience, Sid.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you. So I apologize for coming in late. Jedediah, I enjoyed what I heard up till now. So first point is, some of you may not know me, but I'm not an expert. First point up there. If I mention some things you may not know, or some names you may not know, just make a note of them and do your own research. I'm not an expert, okay? When I join these sessions, I usually make notes that I think that might be useful. And Jedediah, you mentioned the lower self. Now, the lower self is mentioned by Jacob Böhme, for example, but I found him mentioned in Heinrich Kunrad, his works, alchemist, Heinrich Kunrad. If you're ever in doubt about alchemy, always go to Heinrich Kunrad. Another person of importance is Julius Sperber. Okay, Julius Sperber is one of the key people of that period with Kunrad, even though Kunrad is the most well-known. And Abraham von Frankenberg. Now, that goes.
Sid, sorry to interrupt you, but I'd like to ask you, please. It would be very helpful for people if you could maybe, after you finish speaking, just type the names in the chat of these people that you mentioned, so that people can maybe copy and paste it into a text document, and then they can do their own research.
Okay,
I'll be very helpful.
I'll do that. Okay. Okay, that's regarding the lower self. Julius Sperber also mentions the difference between the waters above, and he also mentions the waters of the soul. So he mentions the 4 rivers of the soul and the source being within you. Okay, so the waters above, the source is within you, the source of the 4 rivers. And the term, the 4 rivers, is a very ancient term. You can find it in ancient Egypt as well. To move on to the subject of the problems that we have or facing in the world today, we were warned by Karl von Eckartshausen in a book, a special book he wrote in 1790 about the temple of false politics. Okay, worshiping the false gods and all the rest of it. So we've been advised in many sources, many books, about what not to do or what to do. And coming back to the alchemical process, I'd like to come back just to the basic 4 elements. Okay, we are experiencing a process, and we're repeating this process for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It might help you if you focus on the element of water, and especially if you feel you're getting dragged into all the chaos of the mainstream media of the world of today. Withdraw and maybe get a large bowl of water, and then focus on the bowl of water, or visualize the bowl of water. Okay, to get away from this very disturbing process that we're going through at the moment. Someone mentioned the Book of Nature. I'm not sure if it's the same as the book with 10 pages, which is mentioned by Martinists, if Martinists are here. Book of 10 pages, the 10 pages are explained. And sometimes you might see in old buildings like Roslin Chapel, you see an angel holding a book. 10 fingers. Okay. The next point, let me just check. Regarding the sources of works, it's unfortunate that the works of Heinrich Conrad have not been published in English. A lot of work has been done. His main works, his main Latin works, have been published in German, and all of his other books are in Old German. And we have very, very advanced translating tools, even via Google Books. So you can download many of these books, which are free, many of these digitized books, and you can use the translation tools. You just have to copy and paste, and it will pop up and translate a page for you. Okay. I'd like to mention two books that unfortunately have not been published. One book is called The Missive, and they are talking about, there are 4 discussions about the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians. Okay, that's the main subject of the book. But the book also contains an index and a list of 200 Rosicrucian books. Okay, so in the beginning there, the Fama Fraternitatis, Confessio, etc., are mentioned. And one of the first books that is mentioned is the Echo by Julius Sperber. It's a massive book, but an amazing work. I know someone who's he's a member of the SRIA in America. He's working on a translation in English, but that's probably a private project at the moment. So that book is called The Missive. It is believed that it's written by, let me just get the name right, Hermann Fichtel. It's not, we're not sure, because Hermann Fichtel, the name Hermann Fichtel is believed to be a pseudonym that has been very cleverly hidden. The other book is called the Adeptorum. The Adeptorum is a who's who of the key people in history, as well as the period in Europe. Okay, I think that's just about it. Got Louis Claude de Saint-Martin. He goes into the lower self.
So Sid, it would be very helpful, please, if you could put some of those names, as I mentioned, in the chat, and then people can copy and paste those and do their own research.
Can I just close on the one last point?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Different cultures and different organizations have had their, I would say, their secret orders or orders of initiation, and they have to protect it. They have to keep it protected. Otherwise, things go very badly wrong. I'm looking at ancient Persian groups called the Fruit Bringers. And the tradition of the Fruit Bringers went to Germany via various ways. And the Fruit Bringers was mentioned by Hermann Fichtel, okay? And the connection with the Zenda Vesta. It's an ancient book. I haven't read it myself, but there's another link for you. And another link I found is with the Order of the Golden Fleece. So I'm not suggesting that the Order of the Golden Fleece is a mystical order, but they were perhaps protecting various cells within their structure. The Order of the Golden Fleece. The term Golden Fleece has been used in different books, also by I've forgotten his name. Okay, but.
Sid, sorry to interrupt.
Can we just move on from this?
Yeah, we need to move on, because we have somebody else whose hand is raised.
Okay, we can move on. I'll make those notes and send them to you.
Thank
Okay.
you, Sid.
Right.
Johannes, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If it's Johann, then
yes,
I apologize.
It's okay. I'm Johannes from Germany, and I like to share some impressions about Mother Mary. It was said that there are stars over her head, and my impressions were that it is helpful to meditate about Bina, the Divine Mother. She is often called the Dark Mother, and stands for the whole universe. And materia of the whole universe is not alone. All the time the light is married with the materia. And therefore, if there are, how to say, lower natures in us, we have to integrate them so that they get harmless. And therefore, in some traditions, they speak about reintegration. And this is an important aim for us in our life, to get whole, and that the divine leads everything in our life. That would be now enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. I love the two sunflowers above your head in the background. That's wonderful. Thank you.
The father and the mother, no?
Uh-huh.
The blue is the feminine, and the sun is the masculine, probably. But it is not planned.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's see, Jedediah, could I hand back over to you if you have any kind of closing statements or observations or thoughts, please?
Yeah, well, maybe I'd just say something quickly to in response to a few of these. It's been great listening to all of this, by the way, because I'm always impressed by this body, just how philosophical these discussions have become here. So yeah, just taking notes and listening. So thank you for all of your insights. Maybe just two things about this tradition of alchemy coming from women, from Mary the Jewess. I mean, even Zosimos says this too, that he learned from Mary, and this is where you get this term, this Mary's bath, also that I mentioned. So it is quite true that in the ancient tradition, there's already this connection to some Mary beginning it all. So I find that also interesting. And the discussion of plants is also very important. I was sticking to this spiritual process of alchemy, but of course plants, not just animals or minerals, but plants are very important in certain branches of alchemy. And I thought when you were talking about the different properties of plants with this group that you mentioned, I thought that just reminded me of when certain, not just alchemists, but the whole herbalists, the whole notion of when you collect the herbs for these processes for healing, you would say a prayer before you would collect the herb at a certain time, and you would say a prayer to like sanctify the act of plucking this thing. Sometimes these prayers are like, you know, forgive me, I have to take this thing, and things like that. So just an interesting connection there. The other thing about this group of, thank you for these references in the chat, if you put them there, to these other Rosicrucian texts that I would definitely look at. It's quite interesting to me also about this ancient Persian group that you mentioned, about these fruit bringers, which I had not heard of, but I'm already very interested in the connections between this overcoming this dualism between the Rosicrucians and some of these ancient Persian Zoroastrian traditions there. So that's actually a very useful link for me that I would very much like to follow up on. And yes, thank you all for the reintegration from Bruder Johannes. Vielen Dank, dass Sie waren dabei sein. This also what I mentioned, reversing the fall, reintegration. That's basically what I meant by that without using this word. This whole idea that the fall is reversed with the apple is returned. This is what I mean also, this notion of reintegration, not just of the alchemist, but also of it's a global project. It's globalism. It was globalism before we had globalism that the alchemists wanted to do this reintegration thing. So perhaps I would just end with a thank you for all of your thoughts. And this is what I wanted more than anything. I'm not here to lay any trip on you, as I mentioned. I just want to discuss these things, and I think that they are fruitful for our imaginations and for for helping us think through the present moment and going forward. And so it was very nice to be here. And again, thank you for the invitation.
Jedediah, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA, thank you so much. Your presentation has provided wonderful source material for our discussions this afternoon. And what an absolute blessing it is that we can gather like this from various places all around the world and engage in such a mutually beneficial discussion and a sharing of ideas, mutual exploration of these hidden mysteries of nature and science. And I do feel that we are all truly blessed to have each other's company in these meetings. So I'd like to say farewell to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going to put the screen view back onto the gallery so that everyone can kind of wave at each other, which is a nice way to end the session. Loads of love to everyone in London. And
greetings from Finland. I can't wave for you because there's no picture from me, but it has been a very, very nice talking and
thank you, Jarmo.
hearing all your voices and your thoughts.
And Jedediah, thank you so much.
About one thing. Let's keep the peace in the world that we can continue these talks.
Yes.
Something bad happening in the world, you know what I mean.
Indeed, Jarmo, I hear you.
From me.
Thank you.
And a very, very big bumper thank you, Jedediah, from all of us in London. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And we'll see you soon.